taxes on their income, minuscule, that, as you said, with the gravity of the wealth that's being created in this country, which is, again, something that I'm not against in terms of just people being successful, but this idea that we have a system that creates a fair, secure retirement, that's one thing that we can do. I think also one of these things that we should be talking about right now is how do we make the Social Security system not frustrating for people who complained before Donald Trump laid off tens of thousands of people with Musk, who complained about wait times and other things. There's ways we can improve Social Security services as well. So I think we can do things to secure Social Security in the long term with a simple fix, not by raising the retirement age for people who are struggling, but by doing things by simply saying, you know what, Social Security taxes already are regressive because they cap out at a certain amount. Maybe skip some of the people in the middle under $400,000 or $500,000 a year, make people who are the wealthiest in our country pay a little bit more. That would be my vision. A very small amount would create a secure system. I think we can also do a lot to improve the Social Security services. And then what I did with Senator Young, this is what's special about this place when it happens, is for people to reimagine what economic security could be about. I'm now very quietly, I think I've told you about this, have this great idea that I've been talking about for years called baby bonds, or that every child born in America, and this is not a new idea. We actually scraped it from people years and years ago on both sides of the island here, had this idea that why not in a capitalist society that every child be born with a savings account, a growth account, that government sees it with some money and their entire lives, people can contribute into that tax-free and it can grow. And so that by the time, not retirement, by the time they're 20, 25, 30, they have thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to invest in things that create wealth, because right now, lots of people are working paycheck to paycheck and don't have stock accounts, don't have the kind of things that could actually produce a lot more wealth. I'm just throwing that out as one idea, Andy, and I'm going to pause because I know you have another question, and I'm going to yield to the question while retaining the floor. But I just want to say, there are so many bipartisan ideas to deal with wealth inequality. I mean, the child tax credit that was unfortunately not made permanent cut child poverty in America in half. It worked for an entire year. And I remember some of my colleagues, from Marco Rubio to Mitt Romney, talking about, hey, we should be expanding the child tax credit. We should be having a bolder vision for American retirement security, for wealth creation, for economic security, but we're not talking about those bold ideas. We have a president who's come in, and one of the first things he's done in 71 days is insinuate fear and insecurity about Social Security by threatening it, by telling lies about it, and by having somebody like Elon Musk calling it a Ponzi scheme, and that's why we get fear. And then they take a hatchet to the actual agency that undermines its ability to deliver service in a good way.
Will the senator yield?
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Yeah. What you raised is absolutely right, and it's front and center in everyone's minds. When my parents immigrated here 50 years ago, they didn't know anybody in the entire Western Hemisphere of planet Earth. But America, it called them, it inspired them, and I asked them once, like, what was it that drew you here? And they said that they felt that here in America, they could guarantee that the family that they raised, that their kids, me and my sister, would have a better life and more opportunities than they did. And that was that sense, that generational progress that is made. But now, I'm standing here with a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. I'm hoping fast asleep right now. And I don't know if I can make that same promise to them right now. That I could guarantee them that they will have a better life and more opportunities. So, there is that growing cynicism and pessimism about that American promise I talked to you about. And I just feel like there's an unraveling happening here, where we see this sense of concern, and it's being weaponized by some to create that sense of zero sum, to push us away from this idea that we're part of something bigger than all of us and that we can all lift each other up in that great American project. And it's sad because as we're getting to that 250th anniversary, it should be a time when we rededicate ourselves to the American project, right? Like recommit ourselves to what the next 250 years would be. But we're entering it now with this sense of pessimism on that front. So, I guess my question to you here is, how do we break out of that tailspin on that front?
So, and you got me really excited. You see me sort of pacing back here because I love that you're a millennial. I'm an X generation. I love the baby boomers, but they're quickly leaving Congress. This is the last baby boomer president we will ever have. I'm confident of that. And the new generations are coming forward to lead in America, and it is time that we dream America anew. It really is. It is time that we revive and redeem the dream. I just am one of these people that thinks like, okay, guys, we have some of the brightest minds on the planet Earth. Some of our founding fathers said we need a little revolution every once in a while. Like we need new thoughts and new ideas and new visions that excite and energize people, that take a lot of the old divisions in our country and erase them and remind people we have common cause and common purpose. And I want to get people excited again about the American dream. I want to renew the dream, redeem the dream. We can do that. I'm so excited about it. And financial security, it is absurd that we don't have the greatest plan to create wealth, not for the favored few simply. Again, the top quartile in America has crushed it the last 25 years. Heck, under Obama alone, the stock market doubled, but most Americans don't own stocks. So people who are sitting on passive wealth were able to grow and grow and grow and grow, while working Americans saw their prices going up, housing becoming unaffordable, and the idea of the American dream under assault. And it ticks me off that other countries are trying to out-America us. They're trying to take our secret sauce that we seem to be turning our back on. Affordable higher education, apprenticeship programs. I mean, some of our European competitors, job disappears at 40, you can go right into an apprenticeship program where you can earn and learn and end up in a career that gives you not just success, but you thrive in. There is no idea that we can't conceive as a country. This is an idea and a time that I just think that we need to start being bold again in our visions for collective prosperity, for everyone to thrive, not just the favored few, but the many. And I'm telling you, those ideas are out there, whether it's baby bonds, a child tax credit, investing in science and research. There's so many things. But you are, can I say this to you affectionately? You are a nerd, as am I. We're two guys that love to read, that love American history. We're two guys that this body, go back a century, they never imagined that we'd be here, okay? And one of my favorite speeches of all time was when Daniel Webster got on Bunker Hill, and he delivered the speech, I'm going to read the introduction to it, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Revolutionary War battle at Bunker Hill, in which the outnumbered colonists inflicted such heavy losses on the mighty British forces attempting to evade. I love one of the quotes. I can't remember it exactly, but the general, the person that was leading the British attack, wrote in their diary or wrote back to the king, "We won the battle, but a few more victories like this, we're going to lose the continent." That's how great these people were. And this is what I want you to know. It's a new generation, right? Those leaders are no longer around. I read this and I get excited about the possibilities for our generation, the new leaders that are emerging in America that have to. It is their obligation not to let the dream die, to redeem the dream. And so here it is. I'm just dying to read this to you. Here it is, Andy. I don't want to read too much of it to you. Okay, here we go. If in our case, the representative system is ultimately to fail, this idea of a democratic government, popular governments must be pronounced impossible. He's saying that we have the obligation to make a more perfect union. No combination of circumstances more favorable to this experiment can ever be expected to occur. The last hopes of mankind, therefore, rest with us. Can we make this democratic experiment work? And it should be proclaimed that our example had become an argument against for the experiment. The principle of free government adheres to this American soil. It is bedded in this soil. It's as immovable as this nation's mountains. And let the sacred obligations, this is the part, and Senator Kim, and let the sacred obligations which have devolved on us this generation and on us sink into our hearts. The sacred obligations. Those are daily dropping from us, from among us, who established our liberty and our government. The generation that established this nation are now dying. The great trust now descends to our hands. Let us apply ourselves to which is presented to us as appropriate object. We can win no laurels in our generation in a war for independence. Earlier and worthier hands gathered all of those laurels. Nor are there places for us by the side of Solon and Alfred and other founders of our state. Our fathers have filled them. But there remains to us a great duty of defense and preservation, and there is open to us also the noble pursuit to which the spirit of the times strongly invites us. Our proper business is improvement. Let ours be the age of improvement. In a day of peace, let us advance the arts of peace and the works of peace. Let us develop the resources of our lands, call forth its powers, build up its institutions, promote all its greatness, and see whether we also in our day and generation may not perform something worthy to be remembered. Let us cultivate a true spirit of union and harmony. In pursuing the great objects which our condition points out to us, let us act under a settled conviction and an habitual feeling that these 24 states are one country. Let our conceptions be enlarged to the circle of our duties. Let us extend our ideas over the whole and vast field in which we are called to act. Let our object be our country, our whole country. And by the blessings of God, may that country itself become a vast and splendid monument, not of oppression and terror, but of wisdom, peace, and liberty, upon which the world may gaze with admiration forever. That's a bold vision. This bold vision that doesn't give up on America, doesn't surrender to cynicism about America. That's who you are, Andy Kim, and that's what gets me excited. Right now, we're fighting against what I think are tyrannical forces. I'm sorry that when a leader stands up, not with humility like George Washington's farewell address or some of the great founders in their inaugural addresses, but stands up and says, only I can solve these problems, who doesn't use his speeches to heal and to comfort, but to talk about the enemies he's going to pursue. And those enemies are not the adversaries who seek to destroy us. Those enemies are other Americans. And to create an environment where our seniors who should be retiring in security are fearful that their Social Security or their Medicaid or their Medicare is going to be under threat, that's insidious to me. This is an unnormal time. This is why I'm standing here. But you, my friend, my partner in the Senate, God, this partnership, I am so excited about the future. I'm so excited about the promise. Let us fend off all attempts to cut Social Security and Social Security services. Let us fend off all attempts to cut Medicaid and Medicaid care and CHIPS and all the other things that we rely on. But let us also not forget that our obligation is not to defend what it is, but to have a vision for what can become. We now, when so many people are giving up on the American dream, on the idea of America, on what you said so wonderfully, that my children will do better than me, that basic bedrock that our children, generation after generation, will do better and better and better. It's time to redeem the dream and dream America anew with bold visions, not how we will just help people survive in retirement, but visions of how we all can thrive in this great nation that has enough resource and enough abundance to provide for everyone's hopes and dreams.
Keep up your energy. I yield back.
Thank you. You're giving me energy. I'm sourcing myself from you. Now, I don't want to just cast aspersions on, and we're saying things that I just want to back up in fact. All those letters from seniors. I see my dear friend from Pennsylvania is now the presiding officer. You missed all the letters I read from Pennsylvania. All those letters where people were using the word Ponzi scheme. Where did that come from? I just want to read. The Joe Rogan Experience. I actually like and enjoy listening to Joe Rogan. Elon, Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. Now that's a big statement. The biggest Ponzi scheme of all time, Elon says. And Joe Rogan says, why? Explain that. Oh, Elon says, so, well, people pay into Social Security, and the money goes out of Social Security immediately, but the obligation for Social Security is your entire retirement career. So you're paying with your, and I'm reading this verbatim, you're paying with the kind of people you're paying, like if you look at the future obligations of Social Security, it far exceeds the tax revenue far. If you've looked at the debt clock, Rogan says, yes. Okay, there's 3 there's, I'm reading it verbatim, our present day debt, but then there's our future obligations. So when you look at the future obligations of Social Security, the actual national debt is like double what people think it is because of the future obligations. Rogan, Elon. So basically people are living way longer than expected. That was the evidence of a Ponzi scheme. Now let's correct something. The reason why we have a massive debt in America, lots of people should take ownership over it, but the biggest debt creator in the last, say, 25, 30 years is the President of the United States, current one, in his first term by blowing massive holes in our deficits to give tax cuts that went way disproportionately to the wealthiest Americans and corporations. And he wants to renew those tax cuts that independent budget folks are saying could add trillions of dollars to our national deficit. So if he's talking about the debt clock or whatever he was talking about, he is a part of an administration, even though he's unelected and not approved by Congress and whatever, he and his president, the richest man in the world and the most powerful man in the world together, they're driving an agenda that's going to drive this deficit much bigger. And they're going to try to pay for some of it, not all of it, because it's trillions of dollars of projected debt. They're going to try to pay for some of it by cutting NIH grants, by cutting Medicaid, by cutting staff at Social Security. So no, Social Security is not a Ponzi scheme. People paid into it. And as Andy Kim and I just talked, there are ways to preserve it, strengthen it, make it better. It's a program that pays benefits after a lifetime of work. It's never missed a payment. It's never run out of money. It's an insurance program, but don't take my word for it. Here is Current Affairs Magazine editor Nathan Robinson writing on March 7th, Why Social Security is Not a Ponzi Scheme. That's a great title. Old age insurance is not a scam, and it's not destined to collapse. Proponents of privatizing or limiting Social Security are constantly telling lies about it. So here's the article. Elon Musk has called Social Security a Ponzi scheme, comparing it to a scam in which a con man must keep finding new suckers in order to disguise the financial unsustainability of the enterprise. The term has also been used by libertarian commentators as reasons and the Hoover Institute, who try to convince people that the program is fundamentally broken and unsustainable, because both Social Security and Ponzi schemes take money in the form of new contributions, which they pay to old ones. It is easy to craft a superficial resemblance between the two, but Social Security is not a Ponzi scheme, and it's important to understand why. Because the comparison is used to generate the illusion of Social Security crisis that can be used to justify major benefit cuts or even the elimination of the program altogether. Under the Ponzi scheme differences between old age insurance and Ponzi schemes, we can train ourselves mentally to resist the propaganda that is used to try to convince the public to support undermining one of our most important social welfare programs. Let's think about a few different cases in which money is pooled and paid out. First, let's imagine a company has a pension scheme. I realize this may be difficult to imagine these days, but stick with me for a minute. Workers pay 5% of their income. The employer pays in an equivalent amount to 50% of the worker's income. When the worker is retired, they get a fixed benefit every year for the rest of their life, equivalent to some percentage of what their salary was. Let's call that scenario A. Now let's imagine a different scenario. 5 uncommonly astute middle schoolers create a rudimentary insurance scheme to guard against being punished by their parents. The children all go to the mall every week and play arcade games together. They each get an allowance of $10 a week which they spend at the arcade. What they decide to do is to spend $9 each week instead and put $1 a week into a fund. If one of them has their allowance taken away by their parents, the fund will pay the arcade money for the week. That way, nobody in the friend group is ever deprived of the ability to go to the arcade. We're going to call that scenario B. Finally, let us imagine a scenario in which a fraudster tricks a group of old people into giving them their money. He says that if they invest their retirement money with him, he can guarantee them a 20% year return, risk-free. They invest. He provides them with statements showing that their money indeed is growing at 20% a year. When they ask him to pull a portion of their money out so they can spend it, he disperses it. But what he actually is doing is spending all their money and providing fake statements. He's able to keep paying withdrawals because he's constantly recruiting new suckers, just enough to cover what people are withdrawing. Eventually, people get suspicious. Too many try to withdraw their money at once, and he flees the country. This is a Ponzi scheme named after the Italian con man, Charles Ponzi, who fleeced people in this way. We will call this Ponzi scheme scenario C. Notice that there are similarities and differences between the three scenarios. The similarity is that there is a fund that some people are paying into while others are being paid. Another similarity is that all three are potentially unstable. If in scenario A, company pension employee starts living a very long time in retirement, the amount of money in the pension fund might not be able to cover the promised benefits, necessitating an adjustment of the contributions from the next generation of workers. Or if in scenario B, middle school arcade insurance, one of the kids might be so unruly that his parents are spending his allowance every other week, requiring the adjustments of the rules of the payouts or contributions to keep the fund stable. Scenario C, the Ponzi scheme, is the most unstable of all because it depends on an elaborate fraud, on fake accounting that disguises the fact that nobody has the amount of money that they are being told they have. It only lasts until people try to actually use the money, but scenarios A and B could also collapse if they're not managed well. We can see that despite the commonalities, there are fundamental differences between scenarios A, B, and scenario C. The first two are legitimate ways for people to pool and distribute money, and they can work just fine, accomplishing their intended purpose. The third is a fraud in which people's money is being stolen. The difference is more important than the similarities. I have laboriously laid out these examples in hopes that we can better understand why Social Security can be made to look like a Ponzi scheme, but it isn't one at all. Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time, said Musk. People pay into Social Security and the money goes out of Social Security immediately, but the obligation for Social Security is your entire retirement career. Now, it's true that in an insurance system, the incoming payments from new people might be used to fund outgoing payments to people who are already part of a Ponzi scheme. But that's not what makes a Ponzi scheme a Ponzi scheme. Musk, not for the first time, doesn't know what he's talking about. One of the reasons Social Security can be made to seem like a Ponzi scheme is because people may misunderstand how it works. People might think that Social Security saves their money over time, and then when they retire, it pays their money back. Not quite how it works. It's not like a savings account. The money I pay in is not saved up for me. It's paid out to today's beneficiaries. When I retire, my benefits will be paid by the incoming next generation of workers. Discovering this fact can make people think that most security is a Ponzi scheme, but it's not. A Ponzi scheme is a fraud in which returns are fake. There is nothing fake about Social Security as long as enough money is in the pool to pay out beneficiaries. The operation is sustainable and perfectly honest. The only reason it matters that retirees do not pay for their own benefits but depend on the payments of the next generation of workers is that if there is a next generation of workers, if there isn't a next generation of workers, we got a problem. But unfortunately, there is every reason to believe that human beings will continue to exist, work, and pay Social Security taxes. Now, what Musk and others who claim Social Security is a scam or in crisis say is that in the future there will be not enough workers to pay retirees the promised benefits. Musk says, and I quote, "If you look at the future obligations of Social Security as far extends the tax revenue, there's our present-day debt, but then there's our future obligations. So when you look at the future obligations of Social Security, the actual national debt is double what people think it is because the future obligations, basically people are living way longer than expected, and there are fewer babies being born, so you have many people who are retired that live for a long time and get retirement payments. However bad the financial situation is right now for the federal government, it will be much worse in the future," end quote. But what he's trying to get you to think this is a major problem or some deep fundamental flaw with Social Security, it isn't. Every insurance plan has to make adjustments over time. If there are a lot of wildfires burning down houses, a company selling fire insurance might have to raise premiums. The increased premiums might be small, but without them, the program would go bankrupt. This doesn't mean, however, that we'd be justified in saying fire insurance plans are a Ponzi scheme destined to go bankrupt. The adjustments needed to be made to Social Security in the long term are minor. Yes, people are living longer and having fewer babies. That means there ultimately has to be some kind of adjustment to either how much is being paid in, how much is being paid out, or both. Republicans want to cut benefits. Defenders of Social Security instead want to raise the money going into it by increasing taxes paid by the wealthy. So interesting that we just saw that in the dialogue with my ideas with Andy Kim. The amount of taxes that would need to be raised in order to make Social Security solvent is negligible. The Social Security Administration has estimated that increase in the combined payroll tax from 12.4% to 14.4% to make the program would make the program sustainable for the next 75 years. As Dean Baker and Mark Westbrot put it in the introduction to 1999's Social Security book entitled The Phony Crisis, the only real threat to Social Security comes not from any fiscal or demographic constraints, but from the political assaults on the program by would-be reformers. If not for these attacks, the probability that Social Security will not be there when anyone who is alive today retires would be about the same as the odds that the U.S. government will not be there. Of course, in the next 25 years since that was written, the chances that the U.S. government itself may someday not be there could conceivably have gone up. This is a funny author. Musk is certainly trying to make sure that as little of it remains as possible. But the point remains, the theory behind Social Security is sound. It is not like an unsustainable con, although it's also not like a savings account. It can easily be sustained indefinitely with some minor adjustments to ensure that enough money is coming in to keep it going. It is also the case that even the need to keep enough money flowing in is artificial. As Stephanie Kelton explained, the restrictions on Social Security's ability to pay out are created by a legal choice, not an actual financial constraint facing the U.S. government, which could keep paying benefits even when Social Security's funding, quote unquote, runs out if it was authorized by Congress to do so. Beware the rhetoric of those who describe it as in, quote, crisis or being a scam. They either do not understand the fundamentals of how it works or they have deliberately tried to deceive you. I cannot say for certain whether Musk is knowledgeable enough to understand the basics and is lying or simply cannot wrap his head around the basic way an old age insurance program works. The author continues, as Alex Larson of Social Security Works explained to me, the right has been trying to destroy Social Security since its inception. This is for a few reasons. First, a lot of vultures stand to benefit from privatization, just as the privatized Medicare Advantage program has enriched insurers like United Health. Second, the right believes that individuals should be responsible for their own fates, has an ideological opposition to government social welfare programs, even if this results in a bunch of old people being poor. They see Social Security as an offensive, big government intrusion into the free market, something that compels people to put money into a retirement program whether they want to or not. The problem is that most of the public doesn't share this hatred for the concept behind Social Security, and the program is overwhelmingly popular on both sides of the political aisle. Because they have failed to win the ideological argument, the right must therefore convince the public of a different argument, that the program is collapsing and doomed and can only be saved through major benefit cuts, which will be stated as a euphemism of raising the retirement age. Hence the propaganda about unsustainability and Ponzi schemes. This can be effective if you don't know much about how Social Security works. It's easy to be convinced that there's something fishy about its payment structure or that it's heading for some dire financial apocalypse. But this is not the case. Baker and Westbrot are right, that the threats to Social Security come from those who say they're trying to save it from a crisis. We need to have a clear understanding of what's going on so we can fight to save the program that works just fine and can easily be made to continue providing retirement benefits to every subsequent generation of Americans, ideally ensuring that nobody has to endure old age poverty. And so why are they cutting Social Security staff? Thousands of people. Again, I've said this time and time again. I'm standing here because this is not a usual time. I think our country is facing a growing crisis, but I'm quoting so many Republicans because a lot of us who've run stuff know that you don't just fire people and then realize the mistakes you've made and beg them to come back to work. They know that you don't just fire people that do essential functions in a program before you've even done assessments of what your goals and ambitions are for Social Security. It's clear that their goals and ambition is in the best customer service to improve the complaints that I've heard over the years about waits, unreturned calls, challenges at Social Security offices. That's not their ambition. We've missed a big opportunity to come together in this nation and start to really reimagine our government that works for people, that can do big things, that can serve folks, and instead we are trying to demonize people. We're trying to lie about critical programs, call it a Ponzi scheme, make up out of thin air that somehow we're paying thousands of people that are over 150 years old fraudulently. We're better than that. To that point, I just want to again make my facts clear. Here's an Associated Press fact check from the president's speech. Tens of millions of dead people aren't getting Social Security checks despite Trump and Musk's claims. The Trump administration is falsely claiming that tens of millions of dead people over 100 years old are receiving Social Security payments. Over the past few days, President Donald Trump and billionaire advisor Elon Musk have said on social media and in press briefings that people who are 100, 200, or even 300 years old are properly getting benefits. A huge problem, Musk wrote, as his Department of Government Efficiency digs into the federal agencies to root out waste, fraud, to allegedly root out waste, fraud, and abuse. It is true that improper payments have been made, including to some dead people, but the numbers thrown out by Musk and the White House are way overstated and misrepresent Social Security data. Here are the facts. What has the Trump administration said about payments to centenarians? On Tuesday, Trump said in a press briefing in Florida that we have millions and millions of people over 100 years old receiving Social Security benefits. They're obviously fraudulent or incompetent, Trump said. If you take all those millions of people off Social Security, all of a sudden we have a very powerful Social Security with people that are 80, 70, 90, but not 200 years old, President Trump said. He also said that there's one person in the system listed as 360 years old. Last Monday, Musk posted a slew of posts on social media including maybe Twilight is real and there are a lot of vampires collecting Social Security and, quote, having tens of millions of people marked in Social Security as alive when they are definitely dead is a huge problem. Obviously, some of these people would have been alive before America existed as a country. Think about that for a second, end quote. On Wednesday, Social Security's new acting commissioner, Lee Dudek, acknowledged recent reporting about the number of people older than 100 who may be receiving social benefits from Social Security. He said, quote, the reported data are people in our records with a Social Security number who do not have a date of death associated with their record. These individuals are not necessarily receiving benefits. Quote, I am confident that with DOJ's help and our commitment of our executive team and workforce that Social Security will continue to deliver for the American people, Dudek said. How big of a problem is Social Security fraud? A July 2024 report from the Social Security's Inspector General states that from fiscal years 2015 through 2022, the agency paid out almost $8.6 trillion in benefits, including $71.8 billion or less than 1% in improper payments. Most of those erroneous payments were overpayments to living people. In addition, in January, the U.S. Treasury clawed back more than $31 million in a variety of federal payments, not just Social Security payments, that improperly went to dead people, a recovery that former Treasury official David Lebrick said was just the tip of the iceberg. The money was reclaimed as part of a 5-month pilot program after Congress gave the Department of Treasury temporary access to the Social Security Administration's full death master file for 3 years as part of the omnibus appropriation bill in 2021. The Social Security Administration maintains the most complete database of individuals who have died and the file contains more than 142 million records which go back to 1989. Treasury estimated in January that it would recover more than 215 million during its 3-year access period, which runs from December 2023 through 2026. So are tens of millions of people over 100 years old receiving benefits? No. 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 But the letters I read from scared people across the country show what happens when a president lies, when his unelected, biggest campaign contributor, richest man in the world, just continue to make public statements to insinuate fear and doubt and chaos, and then make announcements that they have to take back, that they're going to end call-in service, which so many seniors rely on. Then they create more fear when people see that posted government buildings that are to be sold at auction to the private sector are actually the addresses of their Social Security offices. Why, everywhere I'm going around my state, everywhere have gone around the country in the last few weeks, and my mom and her mostly Republican senior community are all up in arms and feel this fear, or the people that we read about who write letters about losing sleep, it's because of the chaos, the crass cruelty, the unjustified cuts, and attacks on a program that is the bedrock between security and financial ruin for so many Americans. Here's a Wall Street Journal writing about this, how Trump and Musk are undermining Social Security. Dealing with Social Security, Wall Street Journal writes, is heading from bad to worse. The agency administers benefits is cutting staff and restricting services as part of the Department of Government Efficiency's review. The Wall Street Journal writes, the federal agency that administers Social Security benefits is facing a customer service mess. The Social Security Administration is cutting staff, restricting what recipients can do over the phone, and closing some local field offices that help people in person. The number of retirees claiming benefits has risen in recent years as boomers age. Few federal agencies reach as far into Americans' lives as Social Security, which delivers a monthly check to some 70 million people. Many of those people now fear that the changes, part of President Trump's powerful overhaul of the federal government through the Department of Government Efficiencies, are eroding confidence in the nearly 90-year-old program. The Wall Street Journal continues, agency officials have acknowledged that because of planned reduction in services over the phone, there will be longer wait and processing times. An estimated 75,000 to 85,000 additional visitors a week could show up at local field offices, according to an internal memo sent by Doris Diaz, the acting deputy commissioner for operations. Details of the memo, which were reviewed by the Wall Street Journal, were reported earlier by the Washington Post. This is likely to tax the agency's 800 number, where people typically make appointments for office visits. Already, Social Security recipients have complained about customer service. Holly Lawrence made several unsuccessful attempts to reach a human before she filed her Social Security claim. Holly Lawrence, 64-year-old, made several unsuccessful attempts to reach a human before she filed her Social Security claim online. The Washington, D.C.-based freelance journalist said she called the agency's 800 number several times starting in February. Each time she got an automated voice that warned of a 2-hour wait on the phone. Her calls were disconnected before she could leave a message or request a call back. She gave up trying to reach a customer service agent and created an online account on the agency's website on March 3rd. She had to wait 2 weeks for an account activation code to arrive in the mail before she could submit her claim. She's still waiting for that claim to be reviewed and processed. Lawrence said she has virtually no retirement savings. I'm financially strapped and cannot afford to get a financial advisor. It was important for me to be able to talk to someone at Social Security, she said, adding that she's concerned that the customer service delays she encountered could negatively affect others who don't have the strength to persist. Wall Street Journal continues, Social Security has a reputation as the third rail of American politics, a benefit to which elected officials make cuts at their own risk, risking their reelection. Donald Trump has vowed not to cut benefits, but he and Doge's leader, Elon Musk, have made unfounded claims of widespread fraud in the program. I'm going to repeat that sentence by the Wall Street Journal. He and Doge's leader, Elon Musk, have made unfounded claims of widespread fraud in the program. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said in a recent podcast interview that if Social Security checks were hypothetically delayed, it might catch those guilty of fraud because they would make the loudest noise, screaming, yelling, and complaining. Critics say turmoil at the agency is undermining trust in the safety net programs. They're killing those programs from the inside, said Illinois' Governor Pritzker. The result of which is we don't know what they are doing to tear down the scaffolding that holds Social Security together. Doge has gained access to systems containing personal information, but a federal judge has temporarily blocked those efforts. On Friday, Leland Dudek, acting Social Security Commissioner, threatened to shut down the agency because of the judge's order, but later reversed course. Dudek, the acting commissioner, said the changes are designed to make sure the right payment is to the right person at the right time. It's a common sense measure. Even before Doge's plans went into motion, the agency's customer service operation had shown signs of strain. Roughly 47% of the 250,000 people who call Social Security's 800 number on an average day have gotten through to a representative this year. Only 47% got through to a rep. This is down from nearly 60% in 2024. The average time to wait for a callback is over 2 hours. There has been a steady decline in the agency staff, and Doge plans to cut employment by another 12%. That would bring the total number of employees to about 50,000 from the about 57,000 today and nearly 68,000 in 2010. Customer service has been going downhill for years, said Bill Sweeney, Senior Vice President at AARP. It's going to get worse. Some Social Security Administration changes amounts to cuts in services. Wall Street Journal continues, starting March 31st, people who want to file for retirement, survivor or disability benefits, or change their direct deposit information can no longer complete the process by phone, the agency said Tuesday. Instead, they must do so online or at a field office. The agency said it's stopping phone calls as part of an effort to reduce fraud and strengthen identity-proofing procedures. The Social Security Agency has estimated that improper payments represent 0.3% of total benefits. Dudek acknowledged that recent changes, including the shift away from claiming on the phone, are likely to drive up the numbers making appointments at field offices over the next 60 days. He said field employees would be trained over the next 2 weeks to respond to the changes. We're going to adjust our policy and procedures to adapt to the volume, he said. These changes are not intended to hurt our customers. Dudek said in a call Monday with advocates that the phone service policy change and quick timeline were directed by the White House, according to people familiar with the call. Directed by the White House. Kathleen Romig, Director of Social Security and Disability Policy at the Center on Budget and Policies Priorities, says it isn't clear why the agency chose to discontinue identity verification over the phone while allowing it online and in person. She says other advocates say that by discontinuing the phone option, the agency is creating hurdles for those who lack internet service or live far away from the field office. The agency has also largely stopped serving walk-in customers in field offices, said Maria Frisi, Senior Legislative Representative at the nonprofit National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Most waiting in person must book appointments on the 800 number. In February, 45% of people who schedule a phone or in-person appointment to file a claim got one within 28 days. Doge plans to close nearly 50 of the agency's approximately 1,200 field offices, according to Social Security Works, although a spokesman for the nonprofit said some of the offices on the list don't seem to exist. The chairman and CEO of Fiserv, Inc. has been picked by Trump to serve as Social Security's commissioner and will appear before the Senate Finance Committee on Tuesday. I mean, this is the Wall Street Journal pointing out utter incompetence. Utter incompetence. And they're rolling back, trying to catch up, but they don't seem to care in the way they're going about this. They're hurting seniors. They're undermining the security of the program. The title of the Wall Street Journal's article is the best. It's taking services, Social Security services are now going from bad to worse under this leadership who promised they were going to serve people. I see the senator standing, and I'll yield for a question while taking the floor if he has one.
Senator Booker, I'm going to pose to you a pretty simple question here, but first let me lay down a little bit of a predicate. We've heard already some talk tonight about this extraordinary statement, but not terribly surprising from the Secretary of Commerce. This is a close friend of the president, somebody who's very close to all the decisions being made in the White House, where he said, that if a Social Security recipient misses their check for a month, then they should not complain. My mother-in-law wouldn't complain. That's easy for him to say. Maybe you wouldn't complain if your son-in-law was a billionaire. You probably are not going to be harmed by missing a Social Security check if you've got a billionaire in the family. But 99.99% of Americans do not have a billionaire that they can get on the phone if they miss a month, and 1 month's Social Security check disappearing is a cataclysm for a lot of families. As I was listening to you, I just did a little bit of easy back of the napkin math. So the average Social Security check on a monthly basis in this country, is somewhere around $2,000. Obviously, it varies based upon how much money you put in and what your income was, but on average, it's about $2,000. Now, some Americans have supplemental retirement income, but fewer and fewer do today because it's just not the case any longer that employers are going to provide for you a defined benefit plan. So if you were working minimum wage your entire life, or if you were working a low-wage job, you're not going to have money to put away in Social Security. I remember during one of my walks across the state of Connecticut, spending about a half an hour walking with an elderly gentleman in Willimantic, Connecticut. And, he told me, a story that is not atypical. He worked his entire life, most of his adult life, he worked for Walmart. He was really proud of working for Walmart. He helped a whole bunch of people in his community. He was working for a great American company, a company he was proud of. He was helping people every single day that lived in his neighborhood get what they needed when they came into the store. But the wage he was making at Walmart. He was making very little, and they didn't have any defined benefit plan. They would, let him save a little bit of money if he could find the means, but he couldn't, because every single dime that he made from Walmart had to go to rent and groceries and medicine and cell phone bill and transportation. And so he worked for 20 years at Walmart, and when he retired, you know how much he had in savings? Zero. And he felt like he had done everything people had asked him for. He worked for a great American company. He helped people. He worked full time. He didn't miss time. He didn't goof around. And when he retired, he had nothing saved. So the Social Security check, which to him was probably about $2,000 a month, was everything he had. And he's walking with me, explaining to me what his life is like today. He was coming out of the liquor store, and that was one of the things he did every day, was go down to the liquor store and, buy a nip or two and, just pass a couple hours. He didn't like to spend a lot of time in his house because he has roommates. He lives in a small apartment with two other guys, strangers. He doesn't know them. And he says to me as we're walking, this is not how I expected my life to go. I thought if I worked my entire life and I played by the rules and I worked hard, I'd have a little bit more dignified retirement than this. I share a room with two other guys that I don't know. And that's the reality for a lot of Americans. That's the reality for a lot of retirees. $2,000 is the average Social Security check. I don't know why I picked Tallahassee, but I just picked Tallahassee. I said, what's the average one-bedroom rent in Tallahassee? It's $1,200. Utilities, probably another couple $100. The average senior citizen spends about $500 a month on food. Rent, utilities, food, that's it. That's your $2,000. You got nothing left. If you are one of the 7 million Americans who rely only on Social Security, like my friend from Willimantic, you got nothing left for medicine, for transportation. You have nothing left for a cell phone. You have nothing left to go to the movies once a month. You have nothing left for presents for your grandkids for Christmas or for their birthday. If you're relying on Social Security, and many people who work their entire life are, you go without that check for 1 month, your whole life falls apart. And so this just cavalierness that Musk and Trump have about Social Security, that the billionaires that advise them have about Social Security, don't worry about it if you miss a check for a month or 2 months. You're a fraudster. You're trying to defraud the government. If you complain about missing a Social Security check, it is so disconnected from reality. I know we're going to talk later today about the plans to shut down the Department of Education. It shows this similar disdain for public education, the way that they are showing a disdain for working Americans who are relying on Social Security as their primary means of retirement income, the disdain for the 40 million working Americans who rely on Medicaid. And it's not hard to understand why, because if you're a billionaire, if you're Elon Musk, if you're Donald Trump, you don't have to rely on the public school system. Your kids go to fancy private schools. You will never need to rely on Medicaid. You have lived fortunate lives. In Donald Trump's case, because he was born into wealth. You'll get a Social Security check, but that's not going to be your primary retirement. And so you can understand if you put a bunch of billionaires in charge of the government who don't lead lives that are remotely connected to how average people live, they will say things like Social Security is just some big Ponzi scheme, and that's the big one to eliminate. Or, you know what, America will be all right if we impose $880 billion of cuts to the insurance program for 24% of Americans. Or let's shut down the Department of Education because, I don't know, public education doesn't matter to me. So I think it's just the reality that we're living in today, in which we have people who are making these decisions who just don't understand how normal people's lives work, and in particular, how a person's life falls apart if they have any diminution in their Social Security income when the average check is $2,000 a month and the average expenses in most cities for a senior citizen who relies on Social Security is going to be far higher than $2,000 a month. Here's my question for you. You laid out what's going on in Social Security today. It's like the opposite of efficiency. Right? It's called the Department of Government Efficiency. And like what we know for certain in the Social Security system is that everything they're doing has the intent of making the system less efficient, right? You don't just close dozens of offices and shut down the phone system to make the system more efficient. You do that to make the system less efficient. And so I'm trying to figure out why, right? I'm trying to figure out why. And I'll give you, two theories and then let you tell me if you think I'm right or I'm wrong. It could be a pretext to eradicate the whole system. What did they say about USAID? They said that USAID was a corrupt enterprise. It was corrupt. No evidence of corruption in USAID. No evidence of corruption, no allegations of specific corruptions, but they just made these accusations that USAID was criminal, Musk and Trump said this. It's a criminal enterprise. It's a corrupt enterprise. And that became their justification to eliminate it. Within weeks, USAID, one of the most important vehicles of U.S. national security, was gone. Was gone. They didn't run on that. Nobody saw that coming. It was 2 weeks of allegations about criminality and corruption, and then USAID vanished. And people were like looking around, what happened? They didn't tell us they were going to do that, and now it's gone. They certainly didn't run on eliminating Social Security or cutting people's benefits. But boy, the playbook seems a little familiar here, that all of a sudden there are these lies being told. Let's say what it is about the corruption inside Social Security. As you said, the improper benefit payments are minuscule, right? 0.3% of overall payments. And so is this a pretext to ultimately make big cuts in Social Security? Or alternatively, is it just part of a plan to just sort of put the entire country on edge, right? To just make everybody wake up in the morning wondering whether they're next, right? Is it my Medicaid benefit that's going to be cut? Is Social Security going to be there for me if I'm a federal employee? Is my job here next week? And is that a means of distracting you from the corruption and the thievery that's happening at the highest levels of government? Is that in service of an agenda to try to convert this country from democracy to something else? If everybody is just so focused on the next hit, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, my son losing his federal job, is that a means to ultimately try to drive an agenda through the back door while people are looking at the threats coming at them through the front door? It's clearly not about efficiency. I mean, that's what we know. The changes they're making to Social Security are not about efficiency. So the question is, what's the agenda here if it's not efficiency?
And again, you and I, presiding officer, there's a lot of people here I know that operate from just a place of just decency. There are problems with government. We need to fix them. We need to make government more efficiency. We need to deal with the national debt. There's so many things that people on the right and the left in this country can agree on. You and I could agree that, God bless America, government can be a lot more efficient. But the question is they're not playing on the level. There are lies about USAID, 5 million condoms going to Gaza or something outrageous and easily proven false time and time again. The President of the United States, again, this doesn't shock people anymore. He's a president more than any other modern president by independent fact checkers has proven to lie over and over again. But as I sat there listening to his speech, and he just goes on and on about transgender mice when that was proven to be utterly a lie. Or else somebody just misreading the kind of mice that are used in medical experiments, which have a similar word. So are they lying in order to attack these programs? DOGE is insidious in the fact that they keep posting things and then having to pull them down because just independent folks. And I have article after article. We're so far behind in this agenda of things to get through. I'm not going to read them all. Some of them I'll submit to the record, but not people on the left calling them out for what they're doing and saying being a lie about Social Security. So you're pointing out a pattern. First, they tell terrible lies to try to whip up public sentiment against entities created in a bipartisan way, by the way, using congressional powers, approving spending, approving programs, approving agencies. Let's create incredible lies, magnify them on social media, try to spread them with our influencers and everybody. So now people believe that somehow, the president talked about all this money going to transgender mice. That's a lie. But we're going to use that as an excuse to attack scientific funding. We're going to use that as an excuse to attack Medicaid. We're going to use that excuse to pull the people fighting Ebola out of East Africa. And so I was told by a colleague of mine, a Republican colleague of mine, when you come here, don't try to get into the head of your colleague and understand what their motivations are. But this, to me, is a pattern in which they're trying to undermine public confidence. And the result of this pattern has seniors, letter after letter I wrote, using things like, I'm losing sleep, I'm terrified, I'm scared, help me please, telling the most painful stories about retirement insecurity, about health challenges. And so again, I have this expectation, whether you're a Republican or a Democratic president, you don't insinuate fear amongst vulnerable communities. You don't insinuate fear amongst our elders who deserve our respect and deserve to retire with dignity. You don't do that. You stand boldly in front of them and say, you know what? There are some things we're going to improve. We're going to try to bring the best minds in America to make the best customer service, because every independent group has been saying that customer service is failing. And yeah, we want to go after fraud and abuse, but we're not going to do it. First thing we're going to do is fire the inspector generals who have a better record than Elon Musk has over this last decade in rooting out fraud and abuse under Democrat and Republican presidents. So it just doesn't add up. It's not on the level. And so before I allow you to ask the next question, what does this amount to, Senator Murphy? Ultimately, what this amounts to is an attack on the programs, the health care, the services, the retirement security that millions of Americans rely on. And often for them, what they're relying on is the difference between safety and security and chaos and destitution. I'm not exaggerating that. When somebody's Social Security check is the only income they have, and they've already downsized, as you said, brought in roommates, doing everything they can cut costs, because under this president, costs are going up. This is why we have to stand and not let this happen. Yes, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
So there's also a third agenda here. We were not necessarily both here at this time, but a few Republican administrations ago, there was an attempt to privatize Social Security, to take, the corpus and move that money into the hands of the private sector for them to manage the money and, of course, charge a fee or a commission for the management of the money. The Social Security Trust Fund, if sort of fully handed over to investors on Wall Street, could make a lot of money for that industry. The American people rose up against that. It was stopped in its tracks, but that is still a priority for a lot of allies of the president to get their hands on that money inside Social Security. And again, I'm previewing a future conversation, but I keep on making the analogy to what is happening inside of the education space, because those same industries, whether it be investment banks or private equity firms, get wide-eyed at our public education dollars as well, because they would love to get their hands on those public education dollars and have private equity companies running our elementary schools and middle schools and high schools and skimming a little bit of money off the top to pay back their investors. And so, the other potential agenda here is to attack the public administration of Social Security, attack the public administration of our public schools, in order to shift that administration and the oversight of the investments in the case of Social Security to the private sector, so that the president can hand those functions and that oversight to friends in the private sector. And once again, it just becomes a money-making vehicle for folks who already are doing very well, instead of an exercise in just trying to promote good governance, instead of the agenda simply being the education of our kids or the administration of a benefit program. It just becomes about making somebody else money. I pose that as a question to my friend, because we saw this attempt to try to privatize Social Security, and you can certainly see at the end of this assault, this false assault on the inefficiency of the public administration, the solution being to turn the program over to the private sector, the privatization of Social Security that many Republicans have wanted for a long time finally coming to fruition.
That's the problem, right? Is that if you have an idea, bring it. Let's have a national debate. Let's bring in experts. Let's have a debate. The person you're talking about, Bush, who had that idea, he had the good sense to say, you know what? I'm not going to try to kill the agency. I'm not going to lay off thousands of their employees. I'm not going to drive the services it provides, make them worse, to be called out by right-leaning newspapers and right-leaning writers. I'm actually going to bring my idea forward, and let's have the debate in Congress. Let's bring people together. Let's hold the hearings. Let's have the conversation. I can deal with that because this is going to surprise you, Senator Murphy, is I've had conclusions about policy positions that I've changed over the years. When I had a debate, I had a contest of ideas, people have persuaded me. But that's not the way Trump operates. He tried to kill health care without a plan. The powerful letter I read by John McCain about why he voted no is because it was first, kill this thing that people rely on. Don't worry, trust me, we'll figure it out later. That's what's happening with Medicaid right now. There's no conversation about how to better provide health care to the tens of millions of people that rely on Medicaid, from our seniors to expectant mothers to people with disabilities. No conversation. They're just sending people into dark rooms and saying, here's $880 billion I need, find a way to cut it, let's kill it, and then see what happens.
Ready, fire, aim.
Ready, fire, aim. Look, Senator Murphy, I prepared for so many days on this, and we're talking about the point, so I'm going to submit, there's lots of articles here that I'm going to submit to the record without objection from the presiding officer. I'd like to submit a Washington Post article about long waits, waves of calls, website crashes, Social Security is breaking down. May I submit this for the record?
Without objection.
Thank you to the presiding officer and my friend who I'm keeping up at 3 a.m. He's a kind, generous man to be here. Here's a closure of Social Security offices, 47 closures across the country in red states and blue states, everywhere between. Closures of Social Security offices. I know everybody's talking about cutting Social Security, but what they're doing right now is grinding the services of Social Security, grinding them down. So with the permission of I'd like to submit an article for the record from the Associated Press, a list of Social Security offices across the U.S. expected to close this year. Thank you very much. I want to read some of the places. Alabama, 634. This is without the rest of the language I just put in the record, but just for folks out there that are watching, these are the places, Social Security offices, provide really important services to your community that this administration, Elon Musk, are closing. Alabama, 634 Broad Street. Arkansas, 965 Holiday Drive, Forest City. 483 Jefferson Avenue in Texarkana. In the great state of Colorado, they're closing 825 North Crest Drive, Grand Junction. In Florida, they're closing 4740 Dairy Road in Melbourne. In Georgia, they're closing 1338 Broadway, Columbus. In Kentucky, they're closing 825 High Street in Hazard. In Louisiana, they're closing 178 Civic Center Drive, Houma. In Mississippi, there's 3 places they're closing. 4717 26th Street, Meridian, to the great people that live there. 604 Yalabusha Street in Greenwood. 2383 Sunset Drive in Grenada, Mississippi. In Montana, they're closing 3701 American Way. They're closing Social Security offices in North Carolina, 730 Roanoke Avenue, Roanoke Rapids. They're closing 2123 Lakeside Drive in Franklin, North Carolina. They're closing 2805 Charles Boulevard in Greenville, North Carolina. I know that town. They're closing 1865 West City Drive in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. In North Dakota, they're closing 1414 20th Avenue, Southwest West, forgive me, the great people that live in this community, but Minot, I'm pronouncing, and I'm sure I'm butchering it. In Nevada, where my mom lives, in the city my mom lives, they're closing 701 Bridger Avenue, Las Vegas. In New York, 75 South Broadway, White Plains. My mom worked there. And 332 Main Street in Poughkeepsie, New York. In Ohio, 30 North Diamond Street, Mansfield. In Oklahoma, 1610 Southwest Lee Boulevard. In Texas, they're closing 2 offices, 1122 North University Drive. I know that people are going to write me letters and I'm mispronouncing their towns' names. Nacogdoches? Anybody from Texas here? No? I'm sorry. 8208 Northeast Zach Lentz Parkway. In West Virginia, they're closing 1103 George Costas Drive. In Wyoming, they're closing 79 Winston Drive, Rock Springs, Wyoming. Their cuts to Social Security staff, how deeply are they cutting? They're cutting thousands. We've already talked about it, but if I can, from the Associated Press, can I enter this article? Social Security Administration could cut up to 50% of its workforce.
Without objection.
Thank you. The article that I won't read out of generosity to my dear friend who's presiding, but it details in painful ways what these cuts could mean to people in our country. Just trying to move a little quicker through my documents because I'm way behind. The impact of these cuts, one of the big places they're going to impact is in rural America. It's already suffering so much. There's a lot of sources that are talking about the rural areas of our nation are they going to cut. And I'd like to enter the record another Associated Press article entitled New Social Security Rules Present Barriers to Rural Communities Without Internet and Transportation, a new requirement that the Social Security recipients go online or in person to a field office to access key benefits instead of just making a phone call will be difficult for many people to meet in those rural areas. This is an article from March 22nd. Can I enter that into the record?
Without objection.
Thank you very much to the kind friend who's up with me late, or early, I should say. One more article I want to read, I want to ask for the record. I feel like I can take liberties with the presiding officer because I've known him for like 20 plus years. Consider him a real friend. He married up, and he's going to teach me how to do that. I guess I'm not allowed to insult a colleague on this. That's a violation of Rule 19, I think, but it was a joke. But you did marry up, you know that. Okay, so this is a former Social Security officers who are speaking out about what's happening. People that have worked in the agency see what's happening. 2 former senior officials at the Social Security Administration, one under a Democratic president, one under a Republican president, wrote this column published in The Hill. The title of the column is Social Security Faces a Crisis with Staff Cuts, Closures. Again, these are folks from both sides of the aisle yelling into the wilderness, hoping that more people will understand what is happening to Social Security, what these cuts in staff are actually going to do to the quality of life of millions of Americans who rely on Social Security, disproportionately impacting people who are living in rural areas, red states, blue states, Republicans, Democrats. This is not a normal time, America. That a bedrock commitment made is being undermined by the most powerful man in our country and the richest man in the world. And the title of the article is Social Security Faces a Crisis with Staff Cuts and Closures, written by, again, somebody who worked under a Republican, somebody who worked under a president. May I enter this to the record?
Objection.
And I want to end with what I've been trying to do since I started I think about 8 hours ago. Yeah, 8 hours ago I began. I want to begin by doing what I said I was going to do, is not just lift my voice, but lift the voice of New Jerseyans and Americans. And so here's some words. This is one employee from New Jersey who contacted me to say that the teleservice center has received many calls from the public from New Jersey to Georgia and other states. They all have in common is the fear of losing their livelihood as a result of identification, verification, in-person visits. Seniors, disabled, and others that are economically disadvantaged need a voice, Senator Booker. And the voice I hear all throughout the day from seniors are voices of fear. Please review any policy of in-person identification for the public. Person from my state begging because they're hearing the fear of the seniors that they've pledged themselves to serve. Another Social Security employee from New Jersey who contacted me said, I quote, "I worked at Social Security for almost 19 years. I was approaching my 19 years in July. However, I took the early out retirement because there's a lot of uncertainty within the agency. The resignation of others also brings additional phone calls and workloads into the office. This adds additional stress and no additional bodies to handle the workloads. It also provides poor, unfair service to the public." Here's another story from a Social Security employee in New Jersey. "I am a claims representative for our Social Security field office. The most dramatic changes I've noticed from our field office. The most dramatic changes I've noticed from our recent change in operations is that our appointment calendar seems to be filling up more quickly for simple post-entitlement changes that were formerly handled over the phone. This occupies appointment space for most urgent and critical issues that would warrant an office visit. We have identity verification protocols already in place to keep identities thieves in check. To the extent that some fraudsters are still getting through, requiring people to come into our office to verify their identities is an obviously less efficient solution to the problem. A better solution to enhance security question protocols is to use two-step verification systems and document fraud attempts in our technician experience dashboard so scammers can't just shop around for field offices to fool. Regarding the in-person identifying policy, I believe that it is causing more harm than good. I've had claimants appearing in person frantic that they will lose their benefits because of this. My office has lost 4 staff members, 2 who are members of management. This is nothing but chaos here. And I can foresee more loss and a further decline in employee morale." That's from a Social Security employee in my state, describing what's going on in their office. Another New Jersey Social Security worker. "I work in one of the smaller offices in New Jersey, and we are currently combined with another office that is undergoing renovations, which has caused the number of claimants coming into the office to double over the last few months. And although we do have extra staff, because the staff have been deployed to our location, it doesn't change the infrastructure of the building, such as the number of desks available to do in-person interviews and provide adequate waiting space for double the amount of claimants. In our office, we only have 9 desks where we can interview the public due to safety and safety protocols. 3 of these are front windows where we can do quick changes, and 6 of them are where we could do short interviews or benefit applications. Right now, being that most interviews are being done over the phone, we have over 20 people interviewing at a time now. Imagine having to do these interviews in person. We can only have 6 to 9 interviews at a time instead of 20 plus because there's only 6 by 9 desks available. This doesn't seem very efficient. Maybe they should. Too bad they can't call the Department of Government Efficiency, who caused the problem. Here's another Social Security worker, their story. "The foot traffic in the field office on a daily basis is already overwhelming. The public coming in randomly to show their identity would be a disadvantage for the elderly, people with vision issues, disabled, and someone with no car. This really hits home with me. My older brother lost his right leg to diabetes, is legally blind and unable to drive. He called me concerned about this, knowing there is no way he can get to his field office and cannot afford to lose his retirement. I'm hoping this is reconsidered." Social Security is not a program, it's a promise. We owe it to seniors and working people who've paid into the Social Security their whole lives to make good on the promise of a secure retirement. Not to attack Social Security, to drive them into fear and worry, and when they call for help, to put them on hold for hours, or drive them into offices that may be closing or are overcrowded or are unable to help our elders. Does this sound like America at its best? Does this sound like America being made great again? This is outrageous. These are our elders. They deserve dignity, respect, and they deserve their Social Security. I'm going to move on to the next item, but I want to reiterate again, I'm determined to stand here as long as I physically can. We're 8 hours into it. Dozens and dozens of people, I've read their stories. As I've gone around the country, I've gone around my state, there's this growing anger and rage and fear. There's chaos, there's confusion. And they read the newspapers and see that programs are helping them when an unexpected disease or cancer or crisis hits them. And they see that a bunch of folks are trying to figure out how to cut $880 billion from things like Medicaid. The stories got me a little emotional just because hearing about so many people who, not to their fault, not to their problem, were hit by a crisis, a challenge, an accident at work. Are now sitting back and are going to see what we do. People have told us that their whole delicate, fragile world works because they have a transportation program that could be on the blocks of cuts in Medicaid, or that their home health care worker, or that their medications. And even while these big issues are being discussed, we're seeing, as we've been documenting here, again, from Republicans and Democrats, how the administration is already taking steps to roll back programs, to seize funding that people have been used to access the ACA or to lower their prescription drug costs, or that are funding their research that we're competing with China through the NIH. Republicans and Democrats we've read already who have been saying, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't cut the things that actually produce money for your country in the long term. But now here's something that I want to get into, which is education in our nation. I believe that genius is equally distributed in the United States. There's as many geniuses being born in the wealthiest parts of New Jersey and Pennsylvania as are being born in the lowest incomes. And in the global knowledge-based economy, the most valuable natural resource any nation has is the genius of its children. One genius, one Einstein, one Madame Curie, one genius could change humanity forever. And I hear these stories about China graduating more people in STEM than we have total graduates in our entire country. It's a global competition. And if we are to be this nation that Andy Kim talked about, where every generation has the right as an American to expect that the next generation will do better, not worse, so much of this revolves around what we all know, how important education is to a democracy especially. The best ideas, the best innovations, the best artists, innovators, entrepreneurs, scientists, doctors, teachers. We need to invest in the best pipeline possible. But now, not with Congress, who established the Department of Education, but by executive fiat, undermining the separation of powers, the administration wants to dismantle, defund, destroy the Department of Education and scatter its responsibilities across agencies that themselves are going through massive personnel cuts and are not equipped to handle them. This is ultimately about whether or not we as a nation believe that every child deserves an education, and we should organize ourselves to meet that calling. Our nation's children are that precious resource. One of the most noble professions are those people that teach our children. And so let's go right into it. At the signing ceremony, to commemorate the establishment of the Department of Education, President Jimmy Carter said, "Today's signing fulfills a long-standing personal commitment on my part. My first public office was as a county school board member. As a state senator and governor, I devoted much of my time to education issues. I remain convinced that education is one of the most noble enterprises a person or a society can undertake." Pastor Carter also said the Department of Education was created because education is so important to our nation's future that it must have a robust level of national support. Now, here's a letter that I really wanted to read. I'm a member of a Baptist church with the great Pastor Jefferson, but I actually study Torah. And in my Torah study with Rabbi Davidson, when I heard about all these cuts to the Department of Education, he wanted me to hear from the great Rebbe Menachem Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who in 1979 wrote a letter not in support of religious schools, but wrote a letter in support of public education, in support of the creation of a special Department of Education. He wrote this letter in 1979. I was so moved by it. Thank you, Rabbi Davidson. I want to read it here. This is the Rebbe. "I am certain that you will agree that the state of education in this country, as in many others, leaves much to be desired." He was not happy. "And the status quo, as reflected in juvenile delinquency, etc., is far from satisfactory, and what's worse, has been steadily eroding, and that some determined nationwide effort is called for us to upgrade the quality of public education in this resourceful country. I trust you will agree that such an enormous effort, which is surely in the highest national interest, can come only from the federal government with the fullest cooperation of state, county, and city. In my view, a separate, adequately funded cabinet-level Department of Education subject to legislative safeguards to ensure that the traditional primacy of the states and localities in education affairs would not be jeopardized could well meet the challenge. The main reason why I support said proposal are as follows. 1, the creation of a distinct cabinet-level Department of Education would have a salutary impact on all who are involved in education, particularly parents, teachers, and students. The very innovation of upgrading the status of education from that of an adjunct to or division of another national agency would pointedly underscore its proper place among the nation's priorities. Look how prescient the Rebbe was, and what he might say if he was alive today. Number 2, the workshops of education are the school and the home. For various reasons which need not be discussed, I'm worried about the home, he basically says. Too much of school is left to the streets. Insofar as the street is concerned, there is very little that we can do as things stand. More can be done and needs to be done. But in the final analysis, it's the public school where the greatest improvement can and must be achieved. Among the factors that lie in the roots of the shortcomings of public education, 2, in my opinion, command primary attention. One has to do with the general curriculum, which should place much greater emphasis on character building and moral and ethical values. The other has to do with the quality of teaching by qualified, dedicated, motivating teachers. The latter point requires the upgrading of teachers' salaries on par with comparable professions in other fields of science and relieving them as far as possible of other frustrations and stresses. I just want to do a side note here. I'm a big believer that we should slash public school professionals' tax rates. We need the best minds coming into the profession. Why not, as a country, to say, if you're going to take a job as a teacher, which unfortunately pays too low in our country, let's do that. Instead of, again, giving these massive tax cuts disproportionately to the wealthiest in our country. The upgrading of our nation's educational system will, of course, require considerable federal investment. But this is one area where spending has built-in returns, not only in the long term, but also in the immediate gains in terms of diminishing expenditures in the penal system, crime prevention, reduction of vandalism, drug abuse. In the longer term, it would also bring savings in expenditure on health and welfare, and one may venture to say even in the defense budget, since a morally healthy, strong, and united nation is in itself a strong deterrent against any enemy. And finally, 5, he says, the creation of a separate cabinet-level Department of Education, as I understand it, has been conceived not for the purpose of merely improving administrative efficiency, nor merely as a coordinator of existing programs, or for technical reasons. The main purpose is to breathe new life into the whole educational system of this nation and to involve the whole nation through its federal government in this massive concerted effort. As such, I am convinced a National Department of Education, cabinet level, deserves everybody's support. Thank you, Lubavitcher Rebbe. Unfortunately, this administration is not listening to the Rebbe's. What does the Department of Education do, and how is this administration attacking it? Let me read you an excerpt from the New York Times. Can Trump abolish the Department of Education? It's from March 20th. President Trump signed an executive order on Thursday that directs the Federal Department of Education to come up with a plan for its own demise. Only Congress can abolish a cabinet-level agency, and it is not clear whether Mr. Trump has the votes in Congress to do so. I will tell you, in the Senate, if you need 60 votes, he doesn't. But he's already begun to dismantle the department, firing about half of its staff, gutting its respected education research arm, and vastly narrowing the focus of its civil rights division, which works to protect students from discrimination. Mr. Trump's long history of attacking the Department of Education represents a revival of a Reagan-era Republican talking point. It has unified Democrats in fiery opposition, but is shuttering the department possible, and if not, how has Trump begun to use the agency to achieve his policy goals? What does the department do? Founded in 1979, its main job is distributing money to college students through grants and loans. It also sends federal money to K-12 schools targeted towards low-income and disabled students and enforces anti-discrimination laws. The money for schools has been set aside by Congress and is unlikely to be affected by Mr. Trump's executive order. I don't agree with the New York Times because time and time again, the money set aside by Congress is being clawed back by the president against the people that the Constitution of the United States of America says has spending power. The federal dollars account for only about 10% of K-12 school funding nationwide. While Mr. Trump has said he wants to return power over education to the states, states and school districts already control K-12 education, which is mostly paid for with state and local tax dollars. The federal department does not control learning standards or reading lists in countries. The agency plays a big role in funding and disseminating research on education, but those efforts have been significantly scaled back by the Trump administration. It also administers tests that track whether American students are learning and how they compare with their peers in other states and countries. God forbid we measure people's performance. It's unclear whether those tests will continue to be delivered, given the drastic reductions in the staff and funding necessary to management. Still, closing the department would not likely have much of an immediate effect on how schools and colleges operate. The Trump administration has discussed tapping the Treasury Department to disperse student loans and grants, for instance, and the Health and Human Services to administer funding with students with disabilities. Any effort to fully eliminate the department would have to go through Congress. Republican members would most likely hear opposition from superintendents, college presidents, and other education leaders in school districts. Schools in Republican regions rely on federal aid from the agency, just as schools in Democratic regions do. They're going to run into opposition, said Joe Vallant, an education expert at the Brookings Institution. They have a laser-thin majority and a filibuster to confront in the Senate. Even if congressional Republicans stuck together, Dr. Valiant predicts their constituents would protest, given the department's role in distributing money from programs like Pell Grants, which pay for college tuition, and IDEA, which provides support to students with disabilities. It's a very hard sell. I'm skeptical. Efforts to eliminate the department threaten the enforcement of critical laws. There's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which has supported school districts since 1965 in low-income areas. Individuals with Disabilities Act, which ensures 7.5 million students with disabilities receive an education. The Higher Education Act, which helps more students afford college. Title IX protections to guard against sex discrimination. This doesn't just hurt our country, but Undermining those resources for our students hurts generations to come. I want to submit for the record a New York Times article entitled "Trump Firings Gut Education Department Civil Rights Division." Thank you, my friend. Thank you, presiding officer, sir. How education department cuts could hurt low-income and rural schools in particular. An article on March 21st, 2025. May I submit that too, sir? Again, rural communities are really taking a hit. And if I can give disability rights testimonials. Gutting the Department of Education will be devastating for students with disabilities. Right now, the Department of Education, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which guarantees more than 7 million students in America the right to a free, appropriate public education, it ensures that provides services like speech therapies, counseling, personalized learning plans. Without federal oversight, these protections could disappear, schools could delay evaluations, cut corners, or deny support altogether for parents. Consider Catherine, a resident of Westwood, New Jersey, right by Harrington Park, where I grew up. Catherine has 7-year-old twin boys who receive special services. They currently attend an out-of-school district specialized program, but are very much a part of Westwood Regional School District, and may even one day transition back into the school. In her words, the Department of Education plays a critical role in enforcing the IDEA and ensuring that students with disabilities receive the accommodations and support they need to succeed. Without this oversight, many students risk losing essential services, widening existing gaps and disparities, and they will face greater barriers to academic success and reaching their highest potential. This is not a partisan issue. It's a matter of ensuring that all students, regardless of ability, have equal access to education. Her story is one of thousands of parents, educators, and advocates across the country who are standing up for children's rights to an equitable education. For Catherine's families, for her boys, and for every child who deserves a fair shot at success, their fight for an inclusive education is essential. Here's Ashley from Wayne, New Jersey, who knows firsthand how important the Department of Education's funding is. Her daughter, who's legally blind, relies on Bookshare, an online learning tool that provides accessible materials to students with print disabilities at no cost to schools or families. Without it, her daughter would be left behind. As Ashley put it, this is a service she absolutely needs in order to access information that regularly sighted people do not even have to think about. Cutting programs like this isn't just irresponsible, it would be cruel. Kimberly from Dumont, New Jersey, the mother of twin boys with nonverbal level 3 autism. They attend an amazing school in Nutley because of IDEA. Without it, their future would be uncertain. In her own words, she says, quote, "It was not long ago that kids like them would have had to have been institutionalized. Now they are able to have a beautiful life and go to school. I am terrified of the future if IDEA is eliminated. I am begging you, please consider families like mine." Kimberly, I see you. Michelle from New Jersey shares this fear. Her daughter, who has neurofibromatosis, and has apraxia, depends on in-class support to succeed. She knows firsthand how essential the Department of Education is in protecting students with disabilities. This is her words now, quote, "Gutting, weakening, and ultimately closing the Department of Education is disastrous and dangerous for the disabled students who depend upon it." She reminds us that education is a civil right, and laws like IDEA and Section 504 ensure that students with disabilities receive the support they need to succeed. Alana from my state is deeply concerned about her 20-year-old son who depends on the protections of Section 504 to have a fair shot at the future. Her 10-year-old child with autism relies on these protections every single day. She is asking for help because, as she put it, Section 504 and its rules are very important to the disability community. We need your help to save it. Roger, who's a grandfather from New Jersey, is also pleading for action. His granddaughter has relied on a 504 plan since 7th grade and will continue to need it as she applies to college. He raises the essential question, which programs are directly helping students? The answer is clear. Laws like IDEA, IEPs, and Section 504, they're not luxuries, they're lifelines. Again, this is not about politics, and as we see from various writings, people from both sides of the aisle are worried and concerned. I'd like to submit for the record this article from one of the publications in my state, What Happens to Special Education Programs in New Jersey if Trump Shuts Down the Department of Education. It's by Gene Myers.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. I want to say something about student loans, too. The Department of Education is also responsible for operating the $1.6 trillion student federal loan program, which benefits 42.7 million borrowers in America and allows students to access higher education, something that is shown unequivocally to strengthen our economy. This administration plans to move student loan funding to the Small Business Administration, a plan that even some of my Republican colleagues in Congress have expressed serious concerns about. Here's an article that Republicans are hesitant to stand behind Trump's plan for student loans. Although SBA managed a wealth of COVID relief programs, it normally runs a much smaller operation than the student debt program. President Trump has yet to win over his own party to push immediately, in quotes, transfer of the Department of Education's massive student loan operation to another agency that's slated for deep staff cuts. Trump was expected to propose moving the agency's $1.6 trillion portfolio to the Treasury Department, a concept long discussed on Capitol Hill and suggested in Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's conservative policy blueprint. Instead, the president announced this month that the SBA would get it, surprising many lawmakers and conservatives who track the issue. Although the SBA, which provides financial support to companies for disaster relief, training, and other needs, managed a wealth of COVID relief programs that normally runs a much smaller operation than student debt. It's also slated to lose 43% of its staff. Now Republicans are worried about the size of the debt and the staffing needed to manage the complex system of service borrowers and loan applications. And with about 43 million borrowers and a record number of them starting to fall behind on their payments since the pandemic-era hiatus ended in 2023, transferring this work may be one of the most challenging hurdles for unwinding the agency President Trump has pledged to close. A lot of us were thinking it would go to Treasury. We're talking about the huge nature of student loans, House Education and Workforce Chair Tim Walberg said in an interview. They have much larger staffing capabilities right now than SBA, but the president may have something specific in mind that I'm not aware of. Early legislation from Senator Mike Rounds aimed at dismantling the Education Department also recommended the Treasury Department for the job. At a recent House Rules Committee meeting, Walberg suggested that moving the portfolio to the SBA, which likely requires an act of Congress to complete, might not be permanent. Some Republican lawmakers have been hesitant to say the move is official. Neither the Education Department's Federal Aid Office, which manages the loan program, nor the SBA have provided a timeline or detailed plans to move the portfolio, but Education Department officials, skeptical of Trump's SBA plan, met the week after his announcement to discuss if the Treasury Department should manage this massive portfolio instead of the SBA, according to a person who was granted anonymity to discuss the matter. Some conservatives are concerned about the SBA's lack of experience with colleges and universities and the time crunch and staff will be under to learn the complex student loan system. The plan to move the portfolio sounds rushed. It sounds like no one has been briefed on it, and it's not clear what the purpose is, said Jason Delsey, who served on the Education Department's review group on Trump's presidential transition team. FSA largely works with direct loans, meaning that instead of a bank lending the money, the Education Department disperses the funds directly to institutions in the students' names. Colleges and universities, however, aren't on the hook if the loan isn't repaid. The borrower is. The SBA only started working with direct loans at a massive scale in the aftermath of the pandemic. They're laying off 43% of the SBA staff at the same time. SBA is being handed $1.6 trillion portfolio. That's 3 times the size of what they have, and they're laying off 43% of the staff, said Michael Negron, who worked on the small business and student loans for the National Economic Council during the Biden administration. The administration has not clearly stated whether the FSA workers who have expertise on the student debt system would be transferred to the SBA, which is concern for Negron. That doesn't mean it's impossible. The SBA could be a fit, he said, but the conditions need to be right. There is a world where this can work, he said optimistically, who is now a fellow at Groundwork Collaborative, a left-leaning think tank. The White House did not acknowledge questions about how it would transfer. President Trump is doing everything he can within his executive authority to dismantle the Department of Education and return education back to the states while safeguarding critical functions for students and families, said Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in a statement. The president has always said Congress has a role to play in this effort, and we expect them to help the president deliver. You know, that sounds like a president who doesn't care about Congress, cares about what he's trying to do, hasn't approached this in an intelligent way, making grand statements and opinions without not considering that the department you're transferring loans to might actually be incapable with a severely diminished staff of doing the job. Here's an incredible article by Fareed Zakaria about what this is really going on and how it affects the United States, especially relative to other nations. There is no area in which the United States' global dominance is more total than higher education. With about 4% of the world's population and 25% of its gross domestic product, America has 72% of the world's top 25 universities by one ranking and 64% by another. But this crucial U.S. competitive advantage is being undermined by the Trump administration's war on colleges. Hat tip to the New York Times' Michelle Goldberg for raising this issue as well. We have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country. The professors are the enemy, said J.D. Vance during a speech to the National Conservatism Conference in 2021. The administration has put those words into action. The most dramatic assaults have been financial, a freezing or massive reduction in research grants and loans from the federal government. Some of these efforts are under court review, but the cumulative impact could be that billions of dollars in cuts to basic research, much of it's disrupting ongoing projects and programs. High-quality research in the United States has emerged in a unique ecosystem. The federal government provides much of the funding through prominent institutions such as the National Institute of Health and the National Science Foundation. Private foundations and companies account for the most of the rest. Professors at universities, both public and private, use these funds to conduct research. No other country has a system that works as well. What is risk now is what Holden Thorpe, the editor-in-chief of Science, family of journalists, calls the social contract that the federal government institutions have had to enable the scientific research enterprise in America in the last 80 years. That is what is at risk. Take Duke University, which ranked number 11 in total grants received from the NIH last year. Of its $1.33 billion research budget, $863 million came from Washington, according to the AP. That includes funds for critical research projects on cancer and other diseases, but also supports more than 630 PhD students at the medical school. If the cuts go through, these projects and students will have to be pared back substantially. Just on Thursday, Johns Hopkins announced huge layoffs. saying it would let go of more than 2,000 employees after losing $800 million in federal grants. One crucial mechanism to cut funding is through a massive reduction in the overhead or indirect costs that universities get reimbursed for by the federal government. Overhead makes up 40 or 50% of a grant. But last month, the NIH ordered that it be capped at 15%. That sounds more rational than it is. Universities divide their costs on science grants into research costs, the salaries of the professors and graduate students, and overhead, the costs of the buildings, labs, energy, and utilities and administrative staffs. When you are building a complex lab to conduct experiments, the structure and equipment is often far more costly than the salaries and stipends of the researchers. Michigan State University has declared that these cuts could make it stop construction of a $330 million research building for cancer research, for cardiovascular disease, and neuroscience studies. Government funding plays a unique role in America. It often supports basic research, the kind that companies have less incentive to do. And its results cannot be hoarded by any one company, but rather are provided free to the entire scientific community, to the entire technological community, so that all can use it to experiment and innovate. It's an incredible American system that has reaped billions and billions of dollars of rewards to our economy. Take the mapping of the human genome. It cost less than $3 billion and took 13 years because it was government funded. One of its key requirements was that the research should be made publicly available for all within 24 hours of being generated. The other assault on the universities is a strange new attack on free speech for read writes. It began from a principled critique that bureaucracies, universities, and elites all became too woke. But the government response to this problem has been Orwellian. Searching through these institutions for any mentions of the words diversity or identity or inclusion, and then shutting down those programs without any review. Worse, it now punishes universities on their campuses, people who might espouse certain views on topics like Israel and Palestine, and now is punishing the protesters themselves. I have long argued that universities have a huge problem. They have far too little intellectual and ideological diversity, which is the most important kind of diversity on a campus. But the way you fix that is not to restrict radical left-wing speech, but to add voices and views from other parts of the spectrum. The answer to censorship by the left is not censorship by the right. The fury with which the Trump administration has turned on academia resembles nothing so much as the early days of the Cultural Revolution, when an increasingly paranoid Mao Zedong smashed China's universities, their established universities, and a madness that took generations in China to remedy. Meanwhile, in Beijing last week, the Chinese government announced its intention to massively increase funding for research and technology so that it could lead the world in science in the 21st century. So as America appears to be copying the worst aspects of Chinese history, China is copying the best aspect of America's, striving to take the edge away from the United States as though we are going through our own cultural revolution. Learn from the fascist in China. Fareed's article's over. This is me now. Learn from the fascists in China and don't do what the Chinese did. Do what America has done to lead humanity in the sciences, in innovation, in research, in breakthroughs, in science. We are the global model, and one administration in 71 days has our best universities cutting the number of PhD students they bring in, cutting the research that they're doing, cutting the planned development of research buildings. This is insanity. Insanity. We are America. Why is the President of the United States attacking the science and research at the top universities on the planet Earth, bullying them, undermining them? I've had universities from my state. I've had universities from my neighboring state, not Connecticut, New York. I've had my college, Stanford, come to see me, top researchers. The academic community, not the political community, not the history majors, not the political scientists, not the literature students, not the AFAM departments. The scientists of America have been coming to the Senate to say, what the heck? What is going on? How could you take America's edge, America's advantage, America's strength, America's brilliance, and undercut it in 71 days of your administration? We are killing the golden goose. Why? Because we have a president who is taking money that we already approved, the Article 1 branch of government, and claiming that he could claw it back, all on some trumped-up charge that these institutions are too woke. The solution to that is not to cut science funding. This should make people mad, but more importantly, it should make people stand up and not be bystanders and wait until we lose our edge because our adversaries globally are smiling as we destroy our institutions from Duke to Rutgers to University of Michigan to Berkeley to Stanford. This is madness. This is insanity. And one of a dozen reasons we're going through, a dozen reasons I'm standing here, that we should not be doing things normal. If we are complicit in what Donald Trump is doing, I'm hearing it not from political people, but from scientists that show up in my office, from Cornell, medical researchers that show up in my office from our research hospitals in New Jersey and are saying, they're not political, they're just saying, what the heck? You are undermining the research of today that will affect the breakthroughs 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What's China doing while we're doing this? They're investing. Record numbers, record levels. The country of Tiananmen Square cracking down on college students is now trying to out America, while America is acting more like them because our president is violating the separation of powers, taking away the money we approved. And we're letting it happen by doing things normally here and not holding one hearing. Here's another example of what Fareed was talking about. It's an article entitled, Graduate Student Admissions Paused. Graduate student admissions paused and cut back as universities react to the Trump orders on research. And again, this is not from a political magazine. It's not from the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. This is from Stat News. When did science become political? Acceptances for biomedical graduate students and professional scholars are being cut back at some universities and medical centers across the country as many grapple with the potential impact of the Trump administration's order to cut National Institute of Health research funding. That paragraph alone should have people all in this chamber upset. Let's just give European universities, Australian universities, Canadian universities, Chinese universities a leg up because we're going to cut the number of graduate students and postdoctoral students. The geniuses in our country will have less opportunity. Here goes the article, it continues. The cuts come even as the proposed reductions to funding for overhead expenses set to start on February 10th were temporarily halted last week by federal judges, at least until a court hearing. Universities appear to be exercising caution, with some freezing positions and not taking new applications or accepting fewer students than normal, according to interviews, public announcements, and internal emails obtained by STAT. The abrupt narrowing of training opportunities is leaving many future researchers at the start of their scientific journey in limbo. The academic calendar runs to the rhythm of its own sessions right now. It's typically this time of year when offer letters for PhD programs and postdoc positions in labs start hitting inboxes. Universities and academic medical centers were in the thick of that process when the NIH, under President Donald Trump, put out a policy about overhead costs known as indirect costs. This couldn't be worse timing for doing this. Waverly Ding, an associate professor at the University of Maryland who studies the biomedical sciences workforce, is creating a jolt in the market that is going to be disabling for labs, especially the smaller labs, because they won't have the human capital to do their science. It's also going to create chaos for PhDs. It's going to be a cascading chain effect through the entire ecosystem. I know we don't read science. Actually, we have a few doctors in here that do. But look at the alarm that they're sounding that this is not normal. The slowdown is happening at some universities and not at others. Some students may be unaware of the issue as they anxiously await acceptance letters without fully understanding the role national politics is playing in those decisions. Some faculty are grappling with admissions that are paused and then unpaused, while others say they are receiving little information or guidance from leadership. At the University of Southern California, and as a former Stanford football player, it's hard for me to talk about USC. I had to jab them, Senator Murphy. At the University of Southern California, faculty in some departments were told last week to pause admissions and not formalize offers to students, even those who had visited and been given verbal acceptances. The awkward part is that we are already told these applicants that they were provisionally accepted and invited them to an in-person recruitment day. Many have already purchased a flight and made hotel reservations. I mean, that is just cruel. One professor said in a faculty discussion listserv observed by STAT, I know Senator Murphy hangs out in faculty discussion listservs, that pause on admissions in psychology was lifted this week, STAT was told. Jennifer Unger, a professor who runs a doctoral program in health behavioral research in the Department of Population and Public Health Sciences at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine, said Wednesday she was still not able to admit the 6 graduate students for her department that had been accepted after a visit day on February 3rd. We had flown them out. We told them, we love you. We want to admit you. And then everything just stopped, Unger said. On the day Donald Trump announced they were cutting indirect costs, USC paused all PhD admissions. I just don't know what to tell them, Unger said to the students. Some of them have their offers and will likely go somewhere else. We've probably lost them. Despite USC's unpausing of all admissions in many departments, Unger said Wednesday she was still not able to admit students. She hoped her portal of admit students would open soon, but said this disruption was coming at a time when her field, public health, was already reeling from the actions of the Trump administration, something affecting potential graduate students as well. It's very stressful for them. This is a major life decision, she said. Adding, they were already worried about their futures. They were asking, quote, "Do you think we'll be able to get jobs in this environment? Do you think we'll get grants?" The dean of the graduate school at USC told Stat late Friday that the universities briefly paused PhD admissions to assess the uncertainties around federal funding, but that the admissions process was now open. Some schools, though, were continuing to accept students or had accepted graduate students before the recent turmoil, and said that offers were there intact. "We have no knowledge of any disruptions to graduate student admissions in the science fields," Rachel Zentz, Senior Director of Communications, said. In some cases, the pauses in hirings and admissions were implemented ahead of the NIH policy change. Evidence of how quickly the Trump administration's threats to withhold federal research dollars over diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are shifting the financial footings of universities. On February 6th, faculty at Vanderbilt University were instructed to reduce graduate admissions by half across the board, according to an email obtained by Stat. Reduce graduate admissions by half. On the same day, the faculty at the University of Washington School of Public Health received an email to pause offers to doctoral students, as well as offers of financial support to graduate students. Faculty hiring was also frozen, the email said. This Tuesday, the public health school sent out another email informing the community that some faculty hiring and PhD students would continue, some, but at a greatly diminished level. The school is also planning to take more cost containment measures, including a hiring freeze, a reappointment freeze, through the end of the academic year, due to the volatility caused by the Trump administration. Existing offers will be honored, wrote Hillary Goodwin, Dean of the University of Washington School of Public Health. Marion Pepper, chair of UW's immunology department, said she was instructed by the university leadership to keep her program's next generation cohort smaller than the usual 5 to 9 students admitted each year. That's easier said than done, because the proportion of students who accept offers of admissions varies year to year. Pepper told Stat that while she expects the incoming class to be slightly smaller than usual, she has spoken with program heads at UW and elsewhere who are reducing class sizes by half or more. I know for other programs, they're feeling bleak about how they're going to keep labs running without funding or students, Pepper said. It's pretty overwhelming. Medical schools are hit hard. Medical research hit hard. It's unclear how many other universities are taking similar preemptive belt-tightening measures, but schools of public health and medical schools are particularly vulnerable because they tend to have many faculty postdocs and graduate students supported by grants. Boston University School of Public Health has also ordered an across-the-board hiring freeze on all new faculty and staff positions, including student workers and postdocs. In a campus-wide announcement, Dean ad interim Michael Stein said the move was being made due to the uncertainty of the moment. A spokesperson for the school told Stat that the graduate admissions are unaffected by the freeze. Unger said USC had cut funding for some teaching assistants in their department early in the year, before the executive orders, which would reduce the number of graduate students in her program from 10 to 6. On February 11th, Columbia's University Medical School faculty were told that the school was putting a temporary pause on hiring, as well as other activities like travel and procuring equipment, according to an email obtained by the Columbia student newspaper, the Columbia Spectator. A spokesperson for Columbia declined to comment on the pause. In other cases, schools may accept fewer graduate students than they had planned, not because of an overt directive from university leaders, but because faculty feel unsure about the future given the Trump administration's intent to cut billions of dollars in overhead funding. At the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, 25% fewer graduate students will be admitted this year, 25% fewer. based on a survey of faculty members taking new students, said Mark Pilfer, a professor in cell biology there. That means the school will admit about 75 students across the biomedical sciences. He noted the number of graduate students vary each year, so the decline was not unprecedented as the numbers continue to go down. In an interview with Stat, Robert Farms, the director of UNC's Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center, said the hiring freezes, fewer PhD students, and other similar cost containment measures are being considered as the center is eyeing the same financially turbulent waters of other research institutions. Every one of these things is on the table, unfortunately, Ferris said. There's so much uncertainty. Can we hire this faculty member? Can we purchase this equipment? They just don't know exactly what or how many measures the center has to take, he said, as there are simply still too many unknowns. For instance, the outcome of the NIH indirect rate cut policy is still up in the air, not knowing how it's going to shake out. It just freezes everybody into inaction. Adding to the uncertainty is disruptions to key parts of the National Institute of Health approval process for proposed grants. Although some meetings of study sections in which grant applications are reviewed resumed at the start of the month, meetings of advisory councils have not. Each of the 27 institutes of the National Institute of Health have its own advisory council, which meets 3 times a year to issue final recommendations on new research projects. None of these councils, none, have met since January 22nd. Communications freezes were ordered across all health agencies. A law called the Federal Advisory Committee Act requires that advisory councils post meeting details in the Federal Register 15 days prior to their scheduled date. But because submissions to the Federal Register have been put on hold indefinitely, these meetings can't take place. And without these meetings, no new grants can be funded. According to one NIH employee, at least one NIH meeting scheduled for this Friday to allow an institute director to provide updates that could proceed because it has been posted to the Federal Register was nonetheless canceled Wednesday. This was because the meeting was specified it would include a session open to the public. But because a ban remains in place on any public communications, meetings with open sessions cannot be held. And they can't update the Federal Registry with a revised agenda stating no open session because the Federal Registry is closed. Principal investigators who had been counting on awards to pay the salaries of new graduate students and postdocs are now left wondering if their labs will be able to make it through the summer, let alone take on new members. Referencing the hold on submissions to the Federal Register, MIT neuroscientist Nancy Canwisher proposed on social media Wednesday, "So much for the grant I submitted last September, which was supposed to be reviewed last week. Hardly the biggest tragedy on the current scale of things, but it will force me to severely downsize my already small lab." Fears were similar for one computational genomics researcher at a prominent East Coast institution who asked for anonymity for fear of being targeted by the Trump administration. "We have people coming to visit the lab next week, and these are students we haven't made offers to yet because we can't. I don't know what I'm going to tell them." Beyond the immediate harm to young scientists, he worries about the long-term damage to fields like computer science and biomedical engineering, areas where the U.S. has long been the world leader. If we stop training students, we're going to lose the lead very quickly, he said. It's not clear anyone else is going to pick up the ball. We're just going to be worse off and people won't even be aware of it. It's hard to notice when it takes 20 years instead of 10 to get a cure. Cuts within the NIH are also adding to the rapidly constricting pool of places prospective scientists can go and train. Since the 1960s, the NIH has provided opportunities for recent college graduates to spend 1 or 2 years in a full-time research position within one of the Institute's labs, which many scientists see as a key tool for recruiting young people into biomedical fields. On February 1st, a notice appeared on the NIH website announcing that all training programs had paused recruitment, pending guidance from Health and Human Services. The NIH post-bac program, which provides recent college graduates with research positions in career advising, and last year admitted roughly 1,600 people, will not be accepting any new applicants for 2025, according to an NIH employee who asked for anonymity for fear, of course, that's my ad, of repercussions. It's a vital link in the training of doctors and biomedical scientists in the country. The NIH employee said, you can't find a medical school or a biomedical program that doesn't have students from the post-bac program. And it's ended. While the Trump administration may be hoping that the headwinds in creating for academic hiring may push recent graduates or newly minted PhDs into the private industry, it's unlikely to play out that way because of the speed and scale of the disruption. Pharmaceutical firms are not going to suddenly open up more jobs for graduates to adapt to this situation, said Ding. More likely is that people will start looking for opportunities outside the United States or wind up without jobs altogether. At this point, it's still too early to say if these are the first signs of losing a generation of scientists. But even people like Ding, who track the data that could provide clues about how extensive the damage will be, are facing uncertainty about their ability to continue their own work. Her plan to hire a postdoc are currently on hold as she waits to find out if a grant she has through the National Science Foundation, which is facing its own dramatic cuts, will come through. I mean, honestly, I'm here because I said at the beginning, some 9 hours ago, that I was going to stand here because what is going on in America is not normal. We've gone through healthcare cuts. We've gone through Social Security being attacked and undermined and slashed, Department of Education. But if those things don't worry you, statements like this should. It's still a little too early to say that these things are the first signs of losing a generation of American scientists. I know this. I've been privileged. I've studied at Oxford University overseas. I've studied at Stanford University in Silicon Valley, and I've studied at Yale. And watched friends get degrees in the sciences in things I couldn't spell. And they had options, not just in America, but the brightest minds on the planet Earth. There's a global competition going on for them. From Canada to Oxford to countries in Asia. If you're telling me thousands of people right now, 71 days into the Trump administration, are losing opportunities in the sciences to do research in the most important areas of human endeavor, can't get hired, they will go elsewhere. For over a generation, America has led the planet Earth because of this combination between research universities, private sector industry, and government. How do I know this? Because I'm here because of it. The whole computer revolution in America was because incredible computer science researchers at academic institutions were partnering with industry and being funded in many ways by the government, and it helped companies like IBM with their mainframes dominate. My dad was one of IBM's first black people hired as a salesman in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. My company became, my parents were IBMers. Because when scientific endeavor explodes into new industry, new ideas, new biomedical breakthroughs, it creates a ripple effect through our economy, lifting so many people up. And in 71 days, Donald Trump's actions have led scientific articles like this to talk about a postdoc program which provides bright, recent college graduates, brilliant people, 1,600 of them, to usually get jobs, has been canceled. And this article laments from scientists, not political people, not politicians, that this is a crisis. It's a crisis in America. And we haven't held one hearing on this in Congress. Yet, university after university, I can't be the only senator having this happen. Not just from my state, the universities are coming from New York to California, sounding the alarm that we are going to lose our competitive edge against one of our greatest competitors, China, who is doubling down, as the article said, in research on the sciences. But let me just give you some examples, and then I'll yield for a question. I just want to talk about some New Jersey institutions that have written me out. Rutgers has been a partner in the Air Force Research Laboratory's Minority Leaders Research Collaborative Program. That grant, which has been led by the Ohio State University, is on pause. God forbid they use the word minority, and the annual program review and summer internship programs are not expected to happen this year. Rutgers School of Nursing has been working with the Institute of Human Virology in Nigeria on an action to sustain precision and integrated HIV response towards epidemic control. And they were funded through a CDC and PEPFAR grant. A stop work order came in. Multiple Rutgers entities have received communications from federal agencies related to DEIA cancellation of apprenticeship programs. Many conferences have been canceled that are trying to find the best minds wherever they might be, because there's many geniuses at Howard and Fisk and Morehouse that are often overlooked. Anika Barber, faculty of the Rutgers Department of Molecular Biology and Biochemistry, writes me this: Rutgers holds an NIH initiative for maximizing student development training grant that supports an additional 5 doctoral students. This grant expires in January 2026, and we put in for a renewal this fall, for which I wrote a letter of support. However, it seems likely that this grant proposal will not even be reviewed. I just completed the first year of funding on my NIH Maximizing Investigations Research Award and put in my progress report for the next years of funding. These are non-competing renewals, which means they don't go through peer review. In the past, they were reviewed by the NIH program officials to ensure that the funds are being managed in accordance with the approval grant and the research findings. However, NIH has been extremely slow to process even these non-competitive renewals. This type of grant requires a plan for enhancing the work. I want to read this last letter. It's handwritten. I am writing you not only as a concerned parent who believes in progress, education, and the power of science to improve lives. My daughter is a PhD in neuroscience, dedicating her life to research that has the potential to save countless lives. As a minority in science, she has worked tirelessly to overcome barriers in a field that is already competitive and demanding. Watching the current political attacks on research funding is devastating, not just for her future, but for the future of the American country. Science is not political. It serves all people. Yet funding cuts to agencies like NIH and the National Science Foundation threaten to halt critical research that leads to medical breakthroughs. These cuts will not only slow progress in fighting diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, but they will also discourage young, diverse scientists, many of whom have already fought hard to be in these spaces, from staying in the field. This is not just about scientists. It's about every American. Diseases do not know political parties. Without adequate research funding, we are all at risk of losing the chance for better treatments, new cures, and improved health care. If we truly want a stronger and more innovative America, we must invest in science, not abandon it. Defunding research will also harm our economy. Scientific innovation drives job creation, medical advancements, and global progress. A country that does not invest in science is a country that falls behind. I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I thank the senator. What the senator is outlining is an extraordinary assault, not just on education, but on the knowledge economy. I want to bring manufacturing jobs back to this country, but I understand, I think everybody understands, that we are not going to be a nation filled with low-skill manufacturing jobs. We are going to be a nation that does high-skill manufacturing. We are going to be a nation that invents things. We are going to be a nation that is dependent on engineering and on invention. We're going to be a knowledge economy. We are today, but we're going to be even more reliant on maintaining and expanding our knowledge edge on the rest of the world, given the fact that the pace of change and the oncoming transformation that will come from robotics and AI will make it even more important for a nation to have the most highly skilled, most highly educated workforce possible in order to stay ahead of the curve and not have employment be buried by automation and artificial intelligence. So this is a moment in which we should be doubling down on our support for the knowledge economy, on that integration of public sector research and private sector research, which has always been the genius of the American economy. We did that integration better than anybody, and it is not coincidental that we leapfrogged the rest of the world when it came to that innovation economy. But what the senator is explaining is that the Trump administration is waging a war on the knowledge economy, is literally signing our economic death warrant by coming after the foundational strength of our nation, which is that public-private sector integration. I just checked in with the University of Connecticut, which is going to lose $165 million because of this illegal change that the Trump administration has implemented, dramatically cutting the amount of research dollars that go to institutions with NIH grants. I'll just read like half their list. They gave me the list of all the research projects that are going to either be eliminated or slowed or diminished. A project for improving physical and cognitive function in aging, a project on improving outcomes for people with autism, a problem on understanding neural mechanisms for language and reading, including for people with dyslexia, funding for prevention and care for HIV patients, projects for studying the leading causes of death and disability in the United States, including cancer, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, and substance abuse, projects studying treatments for rare diseases and genetic disorders with specific impacts on health, including sickle cell, mitochondrial disorders, Rett syndrome, and Prader-Willi syndrome, muscle and bone regeneration research, tick-borne diseases. University of Connecticut faces the same crisis as all the other institutions listed in that incredibly long and comprehensive Stat News article.